positionner.
Hello, Sage.
Hello, hello.
Yes.
How are you today?
Yes, I'm fine, thank you. And you?
Good, good, good.
All right, good. So I prepared a presentation.
Yes.
So I will share my screen. Okay. So last time we discussed on the evaluation of CVA using Monte Carlo simulation and during the last presentation. Okay, so now I read in detail the simulation of the how we can evaluate the CVA capital using the FRTB framework. And yeah, and also while I was doing this presentation, there was some terminology that I need to make sure that I grab it very well. And last time, you bring my attention on the main difference between credit risk and counterparty credit risk. Yeah, so basically, we define CVA as the expectation of the losses resulting that the counterparty default. And I share one example last time where we evaluate the CVA as just the differences between the risk-free portfolio value when the portfolio value does not take in consideration the counterparty, and we subtract it with the portfolio value when the counterparty default. Now, we make the difference that when it is a counterparty credit risk, it is where another party is involved. Then it is not that the client will default. So that's the main difference, that we say that the credit risk is a risk on maybe a loan to the client that could default, but a counterparty credit risk is on is not the risk where the client could default. And then you share an example where if we introduce I want to make a loan to a client, and then I pass to an agency A. So the agency A could default. So that is where the probability that the counterpart, the client, no, the agency default to give the money to the client, that's where the counterparty credit risk are involved. Now, and also you share one summary of what you did in the past, and under that there were credit counterparty credit risk. So first of all, I just want to make sure whenever we say counterparty credit risk, is it the same as counterparty risk?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Okay. Good. So then, there in your example, you in your summary, you share the way that under the counterparty credit risk, we have two capital. We got two capital to evaluate. The one is the default risk, and the other is capital, the CVA risk, capital risk.
Mm-hmm.
So, and since we make the difference that credit counterparty risk are different to the credit risk, I'm not so sure if we are in the credit risk, then we got also two capital to evaluate there. And the first capital will be the default risk, and the second capital will be the CVA risk.
In credit?
In credit risk.
No, in credit risk, there's only credit risk. There's only default risk. There's no other thing.
Okay.
In credit risk, you only have default risk.
Okay. So in the case where we are in the counterparty credit risk here,
Yes, yes.
and we are evaluating the CVA capital,
Mm-hmm.
that is the risk that involve our maybe our third party to default. And
Yeah,
and
yeah. I think it's a little bit tricky. I mean, because even the CVA risk was something that was recently created. I think it was created in 2000 and maybe 2012 or something like that, or 2000 and so it's recent. Even people didn't understand that when before. Before there was only default risk on counterparty. There were only counterparty default risk. So
yes,
the counterparty CVA risk is CVA capital is a bit so it is a capital even when your counterparty has not defaulted yet.
okay,
So you're trying to be a bit cautious even when it has not defaulted.
okay, yeah,
It is linked to the volatility of your CVA.
okay,
It is a bit like the VAR, you know the VAR.
yes, value at risk.
Huh?
The value at risk.
Yeah, the VAR for market risk. When you
Yeah.
calculate your VAR,
Mm-hmm.
you just trying to take some reserve when the PNL is very volatile, it move up and down.
Okay,
And in that case, you say if it's moving a lot, there's a good chance that you lose some money. So you will use that volatility to capture the risk. It's the same thing. They use the volatility of the CVA to capture the risk, regardless of the default. So that in the CVA counterparty risk, you have CCR and CVA, FRTB-CVA or SACR, it's called SACVA or CVA capital. There are many names for it, but it just means that it is calculated on it is calculated on the volatility of the CVA.
okay, 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 yeah. And for the case, if we are in the counterparty credit risk, what is the default risk is mean? The default risk. I thought that the credit, the CVA risk already is taking in consideration the default.
No, so see how you do. So your CVA is you need to have um, a profile of your exposure. So you need to know your exposure. Let's say you have an exposure is just maybe you went into a transaction. Yeah, you bought, let's say, a put or you sold a put or a stock or a bond or anything. So there is a product, there is a P&L. Now
Yeah.
you need to do what like something similar like you did. You need to know the exposure of that P&L over time. So your CVA is just for each path, you try to estimate given your exposure and the probability of default, what will be your loss? So the CVA is really a loss if the
Yeah.
counterparty default.
Yeah.
So the CVA is a loss, is an average loss.
Yes.
Now, there's something that is called default risk capital, which is given you have a CVA which is an average loss, the capital is for that transaction, you need to know like it's not a maximum loss, it's like what is your exposure on it, what is the risk on that counterparty. So what people do is that they don't take the average, they take some percentile, they call exposure. They take some percentile, they call exposure. And then there's something called risk weight. Because in the banking, this go very close to what banking is about. Bank, the business is that if a bank lend you, let's say, £10,000, how much do you think is their money in that £10,000? Their own money.
Um,
Do you
I
think that the £10,000 belong to the bank or no?
I think yes.
No, it doesn't. It's probably someone else money that they're taking to borrow. Someone put some saving in there and they use that saving and borrow you the money.
Okay.
So when you want to do capital, you want to make sure that the bank are not using only older people money to do business. They are using some of their money.
Okay.
So the capital is that when the exposure, let's say, if the bank give you the loan, the exposure is something like 10,000. They give you 10,000. The exposure is 10,000. That is the maximum they can lose. But the regulator want them to have at least 8% of that money. So that is when you say default capital default risk is how much, right? How much they can lose. So the bank need to know the maximum they can, more or less the exposure. So if it's a simple book like loan, they have 10 loans. So the exposure is 100,000. So they need to have something like 8,000 of equity. So that is why calculating those calculating the exposure is like what I just did. Your capital risk is just risk weight about 8% of your exposure. So the bank need to calculate its exposure on all things they have in the book, right? That is a default risk capital, and they
Okay.
need to own 8% of that. So that is a capital. That's why it's called default risk capital. If you have this exposure, what is the capital you need to hold to have that
Okay.
exposure? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Now the CVA is different. The CVA capital is not going to be calculated like that. The CVA capital is like whenever I give you the loan is the CVA capital does not apply to simple product like loans because the exposure of the loan is quite simple. It remain constant over time. It's on derivative that CVA capital will apply. Because derivative, I can own you 10,000 today and tomorrow you owe me. So it move a lot. It's very volatile,
Okay.
you know. For derivative, it changes every second it changes. So you cannot do the same like you say with the default risk. Because today I owe you, tomorrow you owe me, every time it's changing. It's just changing. So that's why you have something that is based on the volatility of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you calculate a capital based on that. That's what CVA capital is about. So not only they need to hold capital on things that have simple exposure, but they also need to hold capital on derivatives. And
Okay.
you will say that if you want to calculate the default risk on a derivative, it's not going to be big. It's going to be very small. But the CVA risk on the derivative will be bigger.
Okay. Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you. Um, Now our goal here is to evaluate the uh, CVA capital, and basically the CVA capital is just uh, uh, is the amount, the capital that we need to have in order to cover the risk that the counterparty could default. So the CVA risk capital was introduced to cover losses arise from the fact that the counterparty financial position default. And that's what we are trying to estimate. And using the FRTB framework. But FRTB is defined as a fundamental review of trading book, and it had been set up by Basel Committee of Bank Supervisory to evaluate the minimum capital risk required to cover market risk. Then we're going to use that same framework to adapt into our CVA book. And we have two framework available to calculate the CVA capital. One is the FRTB-CVA, and the second is the basis approach. And the FRTB is we have two different way to evaluate that if you are under the framework of FRTB. The first is the standardized approach, which is a bit analytic and is depending on the sensitivity. So for that, we need the sensitivities. We need to generate the sensitivities. And often those sensitivity can be given by the bank. And we have also the set of risk weight and correlation, which are specified in the regulators, by the regulators. And we also have the second method, which is the internal model approach. This one is built on the historical VAR. And what we need to notice is that we need the regulator need to approve the use of the FRTB as CVA. But we don't have a necessary the approval to be able to use the basis approach. And especially when we are using the framework FRTB-CVA, when we are in the second method, the regulator needs actually to check as well the back testing criteria and the risk based unit criteria in order to approve for the bank to use the FRTB-CVA, the second approach. Now, before we go in detail to the different step for the calculation, I just want to remind us on those terminology, because we're going to be using it throughout the calculation. So a risk factor is just a principal determinant of the change in the value of an instrument. For instance, exchange rate or interest rate. And the risk class can be defined as just the list of risk that are used in order to calculate the CVA capital or market risk capital in the case of the original FRTB framework. And risk bucket is used to just group some risk factors that have a similar characteristic. Sensitivity here is the bank estimate of the change in the value of when an instrument due to a small change in one of the underlying risk factors. We could maybe have a small change in the interest rate or the equity or commodity. But in our case, in our setting here, we only need to measure two different type of risk measure. we, which are delta risk and the vega risk. The delta risk is just the potential loss due to a small change in the price of maybe an equity or commodity or interest rates. But the vega risk is the potential loss that result from the value of the derivative due to a change of in the implied volatility of the underlying. So I will share it in the detail how we can evaluate the data risk and the vega risk. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, here FRTB-CVA is a sensitivity-based approach in contrast to the basic approach, and this framework are subjected to be approved by the supervisory, and as I already defined earlier, we actually need some risk classes, risk type, classify the risk classes, risk type, and evaluate the wage sensitivity, and now go for the aggregation in order to value the minimum capital that we need. And in the normal framework for market capital risk, actually, we needed to evaluate four measure for risk, four risk measure, delta, vega, gamma, curvature, and default risk. But in our setting here for CVA capital, we just need delta and vega. And for the delta measure, we only require 6 risk type, which are the interest rate, the FX, the reference credit spread, the equity, the commodity, and the counterparty credit spreads. And for the vega, we only have 5. So we just cancel the counterparty. The counterparty credits are not involved. So then we need to generate the sensitivity with respect to the interest rate, the commodity, the equity, the reference credit risk, and in order to build the wage sensitivities. And as I said earlier, the risk which are given by the supervisory, and also all the correlation are given. Okay. And actually, we need also the multiplier, which is a coefficient that has provided by the bank. Usually is 1.5, which is a coefficient, a conservative coefficient. Okay, so I just for an example of some data. Here, the curve here is an input data that show this the sensitivities, the risk type, the bucket, and yeah. So here in this small example, we have our risk type, which is the interest rate, and it is inside the measure of the interest rates delta, the delta measure that we want to check. We want to evaluate the minimum capital risk for this one. And I will also show later that inside the bucket for interest rates, we only are dealing with the currency, and we only have one currency here, which is US dollar. And for a currency, for this a currency on this risk type, we actually have is two-dimensional. One is the yield curve, and the other is the tenor, which the year, which are given by label 1 and label 2. Level 1 is the tenors, and level 2 is the yield curve. And the amounts here, the amount are just the sensitivities that we have. And usually those value are given by the bank, but we will try to show how we can actually evaluate the sensitivities. So SK, our K here, I just did the 10, or not 10, I think it's 11 or 10. Okay. So those are the different steps to to calculate the delta risk. First, what we need is to calculate the CVA. In the previous one, we evaluated the CVA of a financial derivative American option. So we need to evaluate the CVA, and then from that CVA now we can be able to evaluate the CVA net sensitivities. Yeah. So in the next slide, I will show how we can evaluate those CVA net sensitivities. And the second step in the computation, we need to evaluate the wage sensitivities. And the wage sensitivities are just the product of the risk wage on a particular risk class multiplied by the sensitivity that we evaluate prior. And then we can get the net wage sensitivity with summing with the wage sensitivity CVA and the wage sensitivity hedge. So the wage sensitivity hedge, the way that I understood it, is just the CVA sensitivity that are not used by a bank in its risk management process. So, okay. Now, so after that, now we can now evaluate the capital charge within each bucket. If we are dealing with the interest risk type now, we have currency as buckets. So within US dollar now, we need to value this quantity, where R here is the disallowance hedge, and all those value are already, we have them from the step 3, and the coefficient delta here, the coefficient are given by the regulators. This one is the across a pair of risk factors. But when we can aggregate them across bucket level. So in case we have different buckets, like different currency, US dollar, euro, we can aggregate them across buckets by just taking the value that we got from the step 4 and aggregate them. And we need also a cross bucket correlation, which are given by gamma BC. And those coefficients are actually given from the regulators. And those are some value. Some of them are triangular, superior triangular matrix. Some of them are symmetric matrix, but I will show. And then afterward, now we can now take the summation of the CVA capital that we got for delta and CVA capital that we got for delta. That will be our CVA FRTB standard process capital that we are evaluating. And this implementation need to be also testing. It needs to be tested if actually the value that we get is accurate or not. That's the last step to check the accuracy of the implementation. Okay. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I draw just a small table from the document that we have. And in our setting, this is just example of delta risk classes. So we are dealing with only 6 classes: interest rate, foreign rate, and etc. So if we are in interest rate, the interest rates, we have actually 2 dimensions on the risk type. It could be yield curve or inflation rate, or yield curve with the tenors, or inflation rates with the tenors. And the the different bucket that we have here could be the bank domestic currency or the other currencies. So the common currency that we know is US dollar, euro, and so on. And with that, now we can actually evaluate the sensitivities, which are just the value that we got from our simulation for evaluating the CVA. We just need to bump the risk-free yield curve here by 0.01, and then we reevaluate the CVA, and we subtract it with the value of the CVA without the bound, and we divide by just the bound, which is 0.01, and that will give us the sensitivity of the instrument. But here is a function of risk-free interest rate curve, and
Yes.
the yeah.
Yes, yeah, Prudence. Yeah. So, maybe it would be easier if you could send me the presentation if that works
Okay.
for you, and I
Okay.
have a look, and we probably have another catch-up call later to see if we
Okay.
have any um uh, thing to discuss.
Okay.
I think that will be a good way to go through the critical stuff directly. One of the important thing to look at is to see if I don't know if it's in your presentation. Look at the differences between the IMA CVA and the FRTB CVA risk. When
Understand.
the difference is when you're using internal method and when you're using FRTB.
Okay.
Yeah, you could look at that. But in the meantime, you can send me your presentation. I'll have a look. And we
Okay.
could maybe catch up sometime next week, maybe on Wednesday.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. But
Okay.
you can email me in the meantime if there's anything. And if I find anything, I'll send you an email.
Okay. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I have maybe a question in the evaluation. Actually, suppose now that if we needed to, let's say, um, from the implementation of CVA that we evaluated before on American option Monte Carlo, uh, I'm not so sure if actually we want to generate the sensitivities, which are one of the important steps, the first step to generate the sensitivity from there. Uh, uh, we have 6 risk type, which are the interest risk, commodity, equity, and so on. And in our setting for the American option, I just want to know which are the risk type that will be involved when we want to actually generate the sensitivities. For instance, here in the case for counterparty credit spread, um, in the implementation that we did prior, we just take the product of the exposure times the probability of default times the discount factors. And the probability of default we evaluated by estimating with the exponential of minus ST divided by 1 minus R. And S here is the spread. So in that setting, I could just bump the spread by 0.01 and reevaluate the CVA because we have the spread, the expression of a spread that we can bump and then reevaluate. But if I'm in the case of the sensitivity with respect to, for instance, the equity, I'm not so sure in that implementation how to get the sensitivity from there, since there's no risk types known as such as equity and
Equity is a spot value.
oh, this stuff. Okay. And the commodity.
There's no commodity in that one. It will be zero.
Okay. Okay. And what about the foreign exchange?
There's none in that case. I mean, foreign exchange, to have a sensitivity, you need to have it in your payoff. Let's say if you say that you paying the client in dollar and the value of the payoff is in a different currency, then you have exposure, but you don't have exposure in that simple case.
Okay. Okay.
So it will be zero. I mean, the sensitivity will be zero.
Okay. Okay. All right. All right.
And the interest rate will be the interest rate that you have for Black-Scholes.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. That.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Any other question?
The other question is actually the imply volatility. Actually, we have the Black-Scholes model, and which are function of the stock price, the volatility, and the maturity. So what I'm understanding is that the value of the price actually is function of those four parameters, and the implied volatility is just the if you want to generate the implied volatility, you just need to take the inverse of the function. The inverse of the function, because the value actually is a function of those parameters, and which included the volatilities. So when we want to get the implied volatility, we just take the inverse that take into consideration the value of the underlying price with the other parameter. So that's what I'm understanding for getting the implied volatility. And then we just need to multiply by the slight change in the underlying assets with respect to the volatility.
What do
Here,
you say is the implied volatility?
the, the implied volatility. So when we are evaluating the value, the value of an underlying asset, it actually is a function of the volatilities, the stock price, the maturity, and so on. And if we want to get the implied volatility, we just need to check the index of the function.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Invest the function that now require the value of the underlying assets, the stock price, the maturity, and so on. So that's the implied volatility that we.
Yeah, yes, I think I understand what you mean. And the implied volatility is you solve the price. So now you're not calculating the price, you know the price, and
Yeah.
you fitting that price with your function
Yes.
by calculating the volatility that will give you the price.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So,
Okay.
and we just need to multiply by the Vega, which can be estimated as just the slight modification of the value in our settings here is just the CVA that we evaluated with a slight modification to the volatilities. Yeah, so that's what I just wanted to figure out, because in our setting for the Vega, say we don't have an analytical expression for the CVA, we just needed to take the differences between the different between the value of CVA that we validated at one step to another with respect to the different volatilities. So and for the case for American option, what could be the the volatility are given even from the, the simulation of the path. So I just want to confirm whether it is this still that volatility that we will be using from the beginning when we are simulating the path, or just another type of volatility that are involved in generating the sensitivities.
It's the same. It is the same.
Okay. Okay, that's all right. So I will share with you the slide and yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Good work. Good work.
And I saw something. I mean, a recent paper here, efficient simulation of FRTB-CVA risk capital. I don't know if you come across that paper before.
No. No.
It had been published very recently. Let me open it, or maybe I can share that. Um, so that's the paper that I saw. It's very recent, and actually, what they are doing there is look like they have efficient simulation of FRTB CVA risk capital. So, and it's very recent. So I'm trying to read and understood. So just want to share. But I do think is this paper would be relevant to look at since it's might be a bit I don't know. But, yeah.
I can have a look. Yeah.
Okay, I could share that with you.
Mm-hmm. I have
Okay.
a look.
All right.
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay.
Okay. Talk next week.
All right. Thank you.
Okay.